everyone. My name is Francesca Barbini, and I am the owner and founder of Luna Press Publishing. Today, I am delighted to be here and to introduce you to our author, Pooja M Biswas.
Hi, Fran.
I am so pleased that we have this chance, because you see, we are about to launch Pooja's book, and Pooja is going to show you the cover right now. There we go. So this is Gender in Time, Time in Gender, the deconstruction of gender in time travel fiction. So the book is coming out on the 16th of February. And because of the COVID restriction, we are not able to do a live book launch. We were supposed to have the launch at Satellite, the convention in Glasgow, but unfortunately they had to cancel because right now, at least here in Scotland, we are in lockdown. So there was no chance that we could do this live. And so there you go, never fear, internet and Zoom have come to our rescue. And so today we're here to have a lovely chat about the book, because there is a lot to be said about, you know, the speculative side of things when it comes to academic research. And so before we start though, I just would like to give a chance to Pooja to introduce herself a little bit and tell us about her background.
Well, hello. Well, as Fran just mentioned, I'm in Australia. So in case you're wondering, that's where the Aussie accent is coming from. Actually, I'm currently doing my PhD at the University of Sydney. And I'm in the second year. I've just started the second year of that. And I also teach creative writing sessionally there, and a couple of other institutions. So creative writing and you know, as a practice, as well as sort of the literary theory that goes behind it, has always been my interest, and particularly when it comes to topics of gender, and especially how to deconstruct gender. And yeah, so that's basically you know, my background, and I first wrote Gender in Time, Timing Gender as actually my master's thesis, which I then expanded into this book that Fran wonderfully gave me the opportunity to actually put out there for all of you to read. Yeah, so basically you can see from that you know, start that you know, I was interested in gender and speculative fiction specifically, and I actually have continued to do that into my PhD. But yes, that's basically my brief introduction.
And you know, we're going to have a chat about that later on, because this is a really interesting topic for us. So you see, so Luna Press, as some of you will know, does a lot of non-fiction work within the speculative side of things. Okay, and so of course when Pooja and I met through one of our submissions last year, I was immediately captivated by her proposal, the abstract, because of course this is the kind of book that we would certainly love to have on Accademia Lunare. And so we started our conversation, and that actually led to another book, which is coming soon.
I did not expect that. That was really good.
Just gonna leave that for a moment. Okay, we'll get back to that, absolutely. But you know, so this is really perfect. It's the kind of stuff that we love to do. Is we love to go beyond the fiction, and that's why Accademia Lunare was created. And of course, it gave us a chance to meet so many amazing scholars and researchers. And so, like I said, when Pooja came along, this was just, you know, a match made in heaven. That was perfect.
I feel the same way.
Honestly. So what I would like to do then is to talk a little bit about the books. But first of all, I would like to ask you about the inspiration behind Gender in Time, Time in Gender.
Yes, well, there's actually a bunch of different you know, inspirations that sort of come into it. The fact that I focused on speculative fiction is in part because I've always been a fan of speculative fiction ever since I was a teenager, and I write speculative fiction myself as well. I just had a young adult fantasy novel published last year, so I myself love the genre. But as for time and gender, they're both concepts that always really confused me, to be honest. When I was a child, I wasn't very good at reading clocks. And I never believed, I could never buy the concept that, there's just a past and a future. And it just seemed like something we are sort of, sticking labels and numbers on something that is completely inchoate. And I could never find myself to believe in that. And neither could I find myself to believe in gender too much. I've always seen myself as sort of, non-binary. I don't personally feel, like I fit any particular label. And so both those things have always been percolating in my mind. And I used to sort of do research on time and write essays on it when I was even just a child. I was very obsessed, slightly obsessed, with understanding what may be lying beneath what we think of as a simple sort of linear progression, past, present, and future. And particularly the binary of past and future, and how they're kind of illusions that we set up to sort of, navigate through what we see as events in our lives. And so that's a very abstract philosophical kind of question. And that sort of interplayed with gender. And the other thing that inspired me was actually because I had been reading speculative fiction for quite a while, I felt that there was a big pickup in the last few decades, particularly in the last 2 decades, of speculative fiction focusing on gender and gender identity issues. I felt like there was just a much, like, maybe it was just the general interest in popular culture, or that there was more open discussion about different kinds of gender identities, and maybe that was it. But whatever it was definitely happening. And I was very excited about it. And I wanted to write my thesis, my master's thesis. I was back at Macquarie University at the time in 2019. And I wanted to, basically do research into this. But I had to choose a topic that was narrow enough to be able to fit into a master's thesis, but inspiring enough and interesting enough that I could turn it into a book, a proper book. And so that's exactly what I did. And I'd always been obsessed with time and with gender as two concepts that I just kept thinking about and kept researching and kept trying to understand for a long time. And then I was like, well, because and all of a sudden it was just, everything became clear, and I realized how many books in speculative fiction there actually were that dealt with time travel and gender, which seems like a super specific thing, but it's actually it's been increasingly popular, and just time and gender in speculative fiction in general, through novels like Commitment Hour by James Allen Gardner, in which people actually have this hour, in which they have to commit to being male or female, but before that they're non-binary. So all kinds of really interesting books are out there, although that's not in this book because I'll be talking about the authors in here later. But yeah, so that's basically what inspired me.
Fantastic, thank you for that. I think it's very important as part of our going beyond the fiction, that we also look at things like the inspiration, and that also leads me to my next question. How this book came to be in terms of, I suppose, the choices you've made of what to select, etc. Can you tell us a little bit more about the journey to create Gender in Time, Time in Gender?
Yeah, actually, when it came to text selection, as my wonderful supervisor Jane Messer at Macquarie University kept telling me, be specific, narrow it down. And I was like, but Jane, it's an embarrassment of riches. There's so many good books dealing with this topic. How do I choose? And but in the end, I decided to select books ironically from different cultural eras, different times, and sort of to also sort of take the reader on a journey through time in the book itself. So Orlando was published in the 1920s and 1928 specifically. Heinlein short story was published in the 1950s, and then The Unintentional Time Traveler by Everett Maroon was published in the 2010s, which is very recent. So basically, I realized that I would be able to pick at different whatever different cultural issues and reactions to issues of gender and gender identity were in those areas. I could sort of bring that to the fore and show that this really has been has been present in the genre of speculative fiction for quite some time. Every time I say the word time, which I just said, it makes me laugh because I'm supposed to be deconstructing it. But anyway, that's sort of why I chose them. I also chose them because these were three books that had as their primary plot the changing of gender or physical sex through time travel. There were a lot of other books that also had similar themes, but it was not the most important thing. And so I, decided that if I wanted to analyze the topic with enough depth, I needed to select texts that, focused, primarily on this.
Absolutely. Yeah. So since we've started to talk a little bit about, the stories that went into the book, we can introduce them officially. So the stories that you will find in the book, which are considered as part of the research, are Orlando by Virginia Woolf, All You Zombies by Robert Heinlein, and The Unintentional Time Traveler by Everett Maroon. So these are the three main stories in the book, even though, of course, you have also a good introduction about the topic overall as well. So is there anything perhaps that, I don't know, you want to say about these three individual stories? What was you were already mentioning, that you were attracted by these stories, the way obviously they deal with the gender within the time travel. Was there anything else in particular that attracted you to these three specific stories? We know you had to focus, of course, but
yes.
Why this in particular?
I suppose it's almost like, the way a flower arranger, sort of arranges flowers in a vase. So it is as much about the individual flowers as it is about the whole arrangement.
Nice.
And so each of the texts were written in a distinctly different style, and and can be enjoyed in completely different ways. Orlando has a sort of rich, lyrical, sensual, poetic, style. It's just, it's like a hedonism in a book. It's so beautiful, and very intense as well. Whereas All You Zombies has this sort of, kind of dry, almost detective noir kind of tone. And at the same time, it has sort of this razor sharp sort of incisiveness that comes to looking into gender, and it packs a lot of punch because it's, well, obviously I've spoiled the story for the people who read my book first. Read the story first. It's only the first story. Please read it. But it's got so many twists and turns that you just literally cannot predict, and it's really great. And on the other hand, the final book, The Unintentional Time Traveler, is to me a very young book. I mean, it is by a young adult author, and by young I mean it's young in spirit. The protagonist themselves is a teenager, and at the same time, it's sort of dealing with a time which is contemporary time, as much as we can talk about linear time here, but and so so she basically starts off as as a young man and then ends up as a young woman at the end of the book, and it's sort of a transgender narrative, and I find it quite relevant. A lot of the political issues that are raised, the absolutely unfair pathologization of the transgender community, historically by society at large, and by the medical community, and all kinds of other issues, as well as the American Civil War. She travels back to Prohibition era, America, and then to travel back into contemporary America. So it's just very different works, and I sort of wanted them to represent the diversity of it's not just one particular type of work that's experimenting with gender through time travel, but it's a proper subgenre which has a lot of sort of diverse expressions.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you had the chance, were there other books that you wanted to include and you didn't you know, for whatever reason you didn't get a chance to explore further or to add, what would they have been?
Ooh, like I said, Commitment Hours one by James Allen Gardner. I also absolutely love it. Actually reminds me a bit of Orlando in how just beautiful the writing is. Newton's Niece by Derek Bevan. It's just a beautiful book. And I have no idea why it's not like taught in all the syllabuses everywhere. It's just amazing. It's beautiful. And you know, it's about you know, it's sort of a young boy who sort of gets caught up in an alchemist's accident and sort of, you know, transforms into a woman and, you know, lives through time. So it's got similar underpinnings to Orlando, but at the same time very unique in its plot. And there's also How to Lose a Time War, which is quite recent relatively, and it's by Amal El-Mohtar, and it's absolutely amazing. And there's also a bunch of other texts that I had come across. But you know what? I got to study them because I decided to do them in my PhD, which I'll talk about later.
That's perfect. Absolutely. No, that's a great lead into actually my next question, because, you know, obviously sometimes, you know, as a publisher, you know, we are there either at the end of a journey of research,
Yeah.
or we are there at the beginning and sometimes in the middle. So actually, I was really excited to hear that your journey is really, you know, in the full flow in the middle of it, you know, and so I wanted to know more about the kind of research that you do, and you know, your focus, and what you're thinking about at the moment in terms of your goals, you know, your aims and where you want to be. What do you think?
Well, you know, my obsession with gender and speculative fiction continues. And so that's what I'm doing for my PhD, which literally nobody who knows anything about me is surprised by, because I don't stop talking about it. So it's great. I have, you know, you know, like sort of willing victim in you. I can just talk to you about this. But basically, yeah. So I'm doing my PhD on post-genderism in 21st century speculative fiction. So it's basically it's a term that was first coined by two theorists called Dworsky and Hughes, and they wrote sort of like a manifesto for post-genderism. They defined the term, and they made the argument that, you know, we should be heading towards or in fact, they made the argument that we will be heading towards a post-gender society, basically where gender as we know it as a binary construct will no longer exist, or if it does, it won't be the way it is now. So essentially, you know, there will be completely free gender embodiment and gender expression, and you know, society that will accept all gender identities, and which will be aided by technology as well. So they make mention of that. You know, that gender technologies and genetic technologies like parthenogenesis will allow us to actually choose what bodies we occupy, and you know, what genders, if any, you know, or if multiple genders, or just either, or whatever suits, basically. And so they make the argument that you know, gender as a binary construct is very restrictive to human freedom, and you know, obviously it has sort of intersectional, relations with almost every aspect of society, whether it's the economy, you know, the branding and commodification of gender. You know, it's like when I went to buy Band-Aids for my son because he skinned his knee, I go to the chemist shop, and there's two boxes of Band-Aids, and one is sort of, it has, you know, Disney princesses on it and it's pink, and there's one that's black and it has Darth Vader on it. And I thought, are those the two genders, Disney princess and Darth Vader? Like,
you have no other choice. You're either one or the other. Yes.
Yeah. You know, and so it's quite funny, but it's, you know, there's also the not very funny aspects of it. There's the income inequality, you know, issues that, you know, can lead to extreme brutality, such as, you know, hate crimes, or even, you know, things like genital mutilation in Somalia. So there's all kinds of injustices that are perpetuated by this binary thinking, and would we actually be better off without it? So the books that I selected for my PhD thesis, they look into, they basically create post-gender worlds in which there are either no genders or multiple genders, like one of them has 5 genders, and or some kind of mixture or an amalgam of genders. So so it's been a really interesting journey.
Absolutely. But actually what you were saying before about the interest in with Academia Lunare, our very first call for paper was called Gender Identity and Sexuality in Fantasy and Science Fiction, which you will know.
That's why I submitted to.
Thank you. Excellent. And that call for paper was full of already back, in 2016 when we started the poll, we already had a lot of, interesting conversation going on. We won the British Fantasy Award.
Yes, I noticed that too. That's also why I submitted to.
Exciting, my goodness, but then, this past August, we then released Love in Fantasy and Science Fiction, which also contains several articles that deal with a lot of the gender issues that you're discussing now, which is from the whole non-binary, polyamoria, romantics, etc. There is so much in it, and interestingly also. We have the current call for paper, which is under construction. We haven't announced the papers yet or their authors. However, even in the world building call for papers in fantasy and science fiction, we have papers which do discuss sexuality and how we could, in world building, move away from the idea of binary. I'm not going to say too much, obviously, because we haven't announced at the time of speaking. But
that sounds so great, and it's so needed. It really is needed, I think, in contemporary dialogue. And that's one of the wonderful things about speculative fiction as well. And what I love, about how you focus on that is because this is the genre that I feel will sustain the longest going into the future. And it's also because it's speculative. It's a vehicle for speculating about issues that affect the real world in a way that other genres don't quite manage, because you can sort of build worlds that actually try out different social models, that try out different gender systems, different sexualities, that can sort of parallel or critique issues that we deal with in the real world. For example, post-colonialism is also, a major theme of some of the books I'm doing in my PhD. So they're sort of blending everything together. And that's one of the great things about the genre is that you can do that, and you can imagine, and it's almost like we can conceptually experiment with and understand what it would be like, and that can actually help us shape our own world. By seeing, for example, the fact that Asimov's 3 laws were actually, inspiration for actual robotics and the laws that actual scientists would like to apply. So
it's true, absolutely. No, we certainly are in agreement with that. It's especially when it comes to, like you said, envisaging possibilities. It's something that that's what speculative fiction does, absolutely, because obviously the moment you're writing about reality as it is, you are of course constrained by what we know and where we are at. But yes, that's what makes speculative fiction so beautiful, and so open to everything, So this is fantastic. Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, speculative fiction writers dare to dream, and dreaming can be very dangerous, and can occasionally stray into the world of nightmares, or utopias. It can go either way, but at least at least they're doing that. They're doing the dreaming, and that can ironically influence the reality that everybody else lives in.
Absolutely, very good. Okay, so one last question before we wrap things up. Now, the book, it's about deconstructing the gender binary understanding So do you have any more cultural insight into this that you can share with us and with our listeners?
Absolutely. And you know, the gender binary, as I discussed it in the book, is based very much on sort of the contemporary Western model. You know, that he, she, male, female. That's it. You know, and sort of a sort of Judeo-Christian sort of version of it. You know, very much you know, Adam and Eve. But you know, I do myself come from a culture which has a very rich history of non-binary models of gender, and indeed, for example, in Hinduism, there's multiple deities that are actually non-binary, like the Lord Shiva, who is called Ardhanarishwar, which is half man, half woman. You know, and he's supposed to embody both. I know that he's referred to as he in the common sort of in common language, but in truth is a non-binary god. And you know, similar themes are expressed throughout you know, Hindu sacred texts and you know, local cultural mythologies. And part of the reason that I wasn't writing this book is also some of that sort of, you know, culture shock sort of thing. I came from a culture that you know, is still very much, you know, binary, and still, you know, by and large subscribes to you know, binary thinking as defined in this book, but you know, whose history is very rich and varied, and whose you know, spirituality and culture is very rich and varied in terms of understanding the gender. And I kind of brought some of that kind of into this sort of a, you know, I came from a place where I could disbelieve the Western gender binary, and you know, aside from myself being non-binary, well, that would do it too. But but you know, that's kind of where the cultural aspect comes in.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Now, so since we've been talking about you know, cultural insight, etc., I think there is really just one last thing I would like to ask you. We mentioned before that you have another book coming out with us in June. So I think that now would be a good time to share this little secret with the rest of the audience.
Here is everybody. There you go. In case you can't see it, it's basically a diasporic mythography, myth, legend, and memory in the literature of the Indian diaspora, which is pretty self-explanatory, I suppose, but it does branch off very well from, as you said, from what we were talking about when it comes to culture. So yes, I mean, basically, it's a book that discusses various Indian authors, such as, you know, Salman Rushdie, and Suniti Nam Joshi and Shashi Tharoor, Vikram Chandra, you know, all various authors who have, you know, reconnected with India after having moved away from India, have then reconnected with it using myth as using myth making as their tool of doing so. Which, by the way, is a very very Indian thing to do. I myself was born in Nigeria after my parents moved there, but I studied in Indian school and all that sort of stuff, and so, you know, I can read and write Hindi and all that good stuff, so I can do that. And you know, I lived in an Indian community in Nigeria as well. But how we reconnected was quite often through, you know, our festivals, our stories, and stories are very, very, very important as ways of, it's almost like an umbilical cord, you know, between the baby and the mother. And so, you know, sort of all these myths and stories, you know, connected us back to the motherland, connected us back to India. And that's, you know, that's very much borne out by authors such as, you know, Rushdie, Tharoor, Namjoshi, and Chandra. And that's basically what I look into, is how do they do that? What do they write? And you know, what are their motivations? So it doesn't just look into, you know, what, you know, literary techniques they use in their works, but it sort of also, you know, analyzes, you know, why they may be driven to do so. And you know, which Rushdie often talks about in Imaginary Homelines. You know, he talks about creating Indias of the mind. You know, and it's sort of the book looks into that as well.
Excellent. Oh, listen, but and you know, obviously, we are gonna have another proper chat recorded if we can meet in person about the book when we're getting closer towards June. So keep that on the back burner for the moment. because right now we're all excited about the release of Gender in Time, Time in Gender. And so the book is going to be out on the 16th of February. It's in pre-order right now, but you can already pre-order it either directly through the Luna Press website or, of course, through your usual online providers. Okay. So listen, thank you so much for being here with us. This is such a, honestly, the fact that we are, there is an ocean or two between us.
Yes,
And
right.
it is amazing that we are able to actually talk face to face, virtually, and being able to share this with people from all over the world, no matter where they are. I think this is really fantastic.
I mean, we're kind of, we are living the dream. I mean, this is what speculative fiction authors used to dream about. Is one day, the world being so small that you could talk wherever you want to.
Indeed. Now, listen, so I just want to thank you once more for being with us. So everyone, I'm going to defer you to the Luna Press website or our blog. I'm going to put links in the description so you can find out a little bit more about the book while you wait for the release. Thank you so much for sharing this moment with me and with Pooja. And we hope to see you at the next virtual launch.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening.